In this lesson, we'll be importing and using the Illustrator paths as splines. Okay, so to import these, we'll want to just open up a blank Cinema 4D file, or I've saved you at 03_begin, but it doesn't have anything set up in it yet. It's basically just a default. And so we'll want to bring in our splines. So we'll come up here to File and go to Open. And I'm just here in your project files. We'll want to go into your reference files folder, which is where we saved in our last lesson. And I've created a normal version, the version 17 of Illustrator Creative Cloud, and also the legacy version 8, which is what we have to import. The other one won't work. So import the legacy version 8. Go ahead and hit Open. And that's going to just say, how big do you want this to come in? We'll bring it in at a 1 scale. So go ahead and say OK. And now I can come in here and start to navigate around and see what it did. So it looks like we have all of the right information. It doesn't look like it left anything off. We are getting some kind of strange boxes around this, but that is because this graph was actually created with the graph tool inside of Illustrator, and so sometimes that has some weird grouping things that happen, but that's totally okay. It looks like we also have a little bit of a strange issue here with this letter and the way that came in. That wasn't visible in the other file, but that is okay. We can fix that if you have those types of issues. So let's see what else we've got. It looks like that grouping that we did not come across, so that's okay. I'm going to show you how you can make this one path instead of having to deal with all the individual letters. Because as you can see, if we come over to our objects panel and look at all of these attributes, there are just tons and tons and tons of paths, over 1,000. So we need to break this up and get a little bit more organized. So the way I would go about doing this is first decide, how do I want these to animate in? Now, in our last lesson, I said, let's have individual word control, but I think we're probably going to have enough of that with our percentages. So any titles or large bodies of text that we have, such as this or this piece right here, I'd rather them just come in as a line. So what we want to do is make sure we are in model mode, and we'll grab our live selection tool. Now you may want to turn up your radius a little bit. So I can just come over here and turn that up right there. And then I can just highlight all of that by left clicking and dragging across. Then I'll right click and choose Connect Objects and Delete. And what that's going to do is give me one spline here with all of those letters included in it. And if I come down here, you can see that that is going to be path 62.1. That's all of those. So I can just double click and rename that to breakdown of species in the reef. And you'll want to rename things as descriptively as possible, because that's really going to help later on. Now, eventually we're going to break this up into 3 different projects, but for now it's going to be really helpful to just get everything as split up as we can. So let's continue on. We see that we have individual control of all characters basically. So what I want to do is just continue to go through and select letters that I want to be controlled through one spline, right click and choose Connect Objects and Delete. Connect Objects and Delete. And you can see that this could start to go pretty quickly for you. Now you want to be careful you don't accidentally select more than one thing. And if you do, you can just control click whatever you don't want to be part of your selection. Right click, Connect Objects and Delete. Now this one is an interesting problem because the outside of the graph is also with that 43. So if I control click, you'll notice that those are all one piece. So later on, whenever we start getting into how we're going to actually be creating this graph, we'll be just using a primitive cylinder. We don't even really need these shapes anymore. So we'll use them as a guide and come back to them later to be able to connect and delete just for the percentages and numbers. But we can do that for anything else, and we'll just come back and fix those later on. Okay, so it looks like this one's pretty much done, minus the graph being a little bit different than what we want. Easy to fix later on, and we'll just continue connecting and deleting everywhere else. Now, this is going to provide an interesting problem for us because we've got this line and I want them all to be one piece. So I can't really get them all in one swipe. So what I'll do is go into my selection and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller radius and then hold shift to add those pieces. And then I can just come through here, make sure I'm grabbing all of them while holding shift, and just make sure that all of those get connected. Now, it looks like that's all of them. So then I'll just right click and choose Connect Objects and Delete. And that's going to give me one spline to control that whole piece there. So we can just go back in and rename that to Line Graph Measurements. Okay, great. So you can continue this process throughout the rest of the graphs. Now, this part later on, again, we'll just be using this as a guide because we're going to end up creating a coin and using MoGraph to show that. So I'm not really worried about trying to connect and delete to get these to be usable. I'm mostly focused on just having control over here. So because this has this weird little box around it, I'll just select that and delete it. And now I've got control over just the coin, which is what I want for later on. Now, we also need to deal with this M. So what I would recommend doing is let's go into a 4-panel view. So I'll just middle click and we'll go into our front view. And then I'm going to zoom in on that M. Okay. And what we need to do is delete the vertices of the different points on this that we don't want. So it looks like we can get rid of that square by itself. So I'll just select that and delete it. And then it looks like it's not really affecting the A. It's just that this has become one big spline. So what I'll do is go into vertex mode just by clicking this instead of, or excuse me, point mode instead of being in model mode. And I'll just select the points that I want to delete. So I'm just holding shift and delete those. And then I can just do the same thing for the dollar sign. Now you don't have to feel like you've got to get them all in one swipe, but you can get as many as you want and then just delete and then continue going on through. Now you want to be careful that you're avoiding anything in the M that you want to keep. But you can see that pretty quickly and easily we're able to get rid of what we don't want. And then I'll just zoom in a little bit further to make sure that I'm not grabbing any parts of that M that are necessary. Watch out for the corner of the M and delete. And perfect. Now that looks just as it should. Okay, so I'm going to continue kind of cleaning up and grouping things in between lessons. I'm going to come back in the next lesson and I'll show you how to extrude our text. And I'm also going to split these up into different projects basically. So we'll have one project for a bar graph, one for a line, and one for the pie chart. So come back in the next lesson and we'll begin working with our text.